Hello, my crafty friends. It's Michelle, the Southern Shell, and I am here today to show you 5 different ornaments that I made out of wood rounds. These are going to be the rub-on transfers, of course, your snowman melting, and then some deco Podge coming your way. Aren't they just beautiful? And then, of course, we're going to have some lace in there somewhere. And last but not least, we're going to use some clay elements on these wood rounds. So let's get started. The first thing I wanted to do was actually get these cleaned up. They've been in my stash for quite some time. For the first set of ornaments, I'm going to go ahead and give them a coat of some Snow White chalk paint. This is going to give us a nice base to go ahead and get those rub-on transfers going to a nice base color. So I had gotten some transfers off of Amazon. I had tried rub-on transfers several years ago, and I wasn't impressed because it just looked like it was a sticker placed on there. Even though it was a rub-on transfer, it still had that outer edge that was not right up close to that image. And so it just wasn't, I wasn't impressed by them. I do see a lot of people today using those IOD transfers. Those are quite pricey, a little out of my price range right now. So I went ahead and thought I would get some off of Amazon and give it a shot. I went ahead and added some of that moss green all the way around to help blend those stickers in, rub-on transfers in with those colors. They are beautiful colors. And so I just went ahead and hit it with my heat gun and tried to get it as dry as I needed to see which ones are going to fit nicely on these rounds. Now, we all know that each of these rounds are a little different. They are real wood. They're cut off of a log or a branch, whatever. So you want to make sure that the images you're choosing are going to fit nicely on each of your wood rounds. So I trimmed up as close as I could on this rub-on transfer, and I cleaned out the hole at the top of that wood round where the twine is actually going to go through. And then I started rubbing. So my camera might be wiggling a little bit because it is actually mounted on my table. So go ahead and rub it on there nice and tight, and then pulling that backing off, just slowly lifting and curving along with it. This was really tight. I don't remember them being this tight in the past, but it was really tight pulling that off of there. It did turn out nice, but I can still see around the edges that it still looks, you can still see that image on there, the clear plastic from where the rub-on transfer was. So I'm just going to go ahead and take some of my clear wax, and I'm going to seal this all in here so that the clear wax will be on there, and I'm hoping it'll help give the same type of glossy texture to all of them, so you won't be able to see that transfer line on each of those ornaments. Let's go ahead and get this twine measured and cut and stuck on in our wood ornaments here so that we can have it all tied up and have them all about the same length. You want them to be all about the same length so they actually look like a set of ornaments. You don't want to have them, one going to be 3 inches long, one to be 5 inches long. So I measured out 10 inches and I stuck them through the holes. Before I did that, I added some glue to the end of my twine. What that did is when I did that, I twisted it. Now be careful because it is hot, but it gave me a sharper end on that to actually go through the hole in the wood round and then also the hole in the beads. Now I'm just using some wood beads here and I'm leaving them natural, and I'm sticking each of the ends of that twine right on through that same bead and then adding another one right on top of it. And so that pulled the twine from both sides of my wood round up through the bead, and then I'm tying it in a knot and dabbing a bit of glue between the knots so that it won't go anywhere. Now I have these rusty stars, and I'm just going to add one rusty star to each of the twine hangers. I tie a little knot in the end, pull it out nice and tight, but add a bit of glue on the end of it before it's pulled all the way tight to actually hold the fibers of that twine together so it's not going to come unraveled. Now, when I was doing this, I noticed that the stars did not quite hang to the front like I wanted. They just kind of drifted off to the back. So I just added a little bit of hot glue on there and just pushed that star right on down to the little wood bead. I cut a little bit of greenery and some of the white snow flocked branch there. And I just cut a little bit of each, and I lifted up that twine where I had added it to my wood round, slid it right under the twine, and then put some hot glue under there. So you can see me lifting up with my little tweezers and then adding that glue, and then the twine on there is already nice and tight, so it's going to hold it down. So I pulled out my little bells, and I have some little small bells that are kind of like an antique copper here. And I'm just going to put it right on there with a dab of glue, stick it right on. It kind of fits right over that hole and attaches right to that twine hanger on that ornament. Now, because these images were so beautiful, I wanted to keep the decorating to a minimum. And so you see I just added that little bit of greenery and the white. So let's get to the next one. So I've seen these melting snowman now for years. See them in the baubles that you can just put the pieces in there. I've seen them all over and just different things. So I wanted to kind of give this one more of a 3D effect. So I have my beads that I'm going to use for the snowman heads. And I really wanted those to be textured because it's supposed to be a melting snowman. Melting snow has texture. So I just put it in that old medicine bottle with some chalk paint. And now I'm just taking them right on out after giving them a good mix up there. And I'm setting them out just to go ahead and give themselves a dry. You can see that texture. I'm going to use the same Waverly Chalk Snow White, and I'm going to give a cover on all of my wood rounds here. Now you can see that I'm actually leaving a little bit of open space on my larger wood rounds. The smaller ones up at the top are, I think those are the ones that are like 2.5 inches, and the larger ones are like 3 inches. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to give some different color into that snow white, because if it's melting, you usually have some mud underneath it. And so look at the mess I made. Oh my goodness, I wanted to show that because even when you're trying to be careful, and I poured it into a little jar and I had my sponge brush there, it still made a mess. But I'm going to use it. I'm going to go with it. So I'm just going to take some of that plaster color and just go a little bit around there for just some shadowing so it's not all pure white. And what I wanted to do with some of those open spots that I left open on the larger ones was bring in some brown. Now I brought in the brown to kind of make it look a little muddy down at the bottom of the ornament, because I want it to look like it's melting and you've got a little bit of mud down there. The different colors also help give it depth. When you think about a snowman, they have shadows, they have depth. Your snow isn't going to be pure white because they're rolling across the yard or the field, and you're picking up all sorts of other stuff into that snowman. So I wanted to add a little bit more to actually hopefully make it look a little more realistic. You know, it's an ornament. I just wanted to have fun with it. So this is where I have to apologize. My camera, I did not zoom in or did not zoom out so you could see the whole frame, and I am so sorry. What I did is I measured the twine for the ornament hanger, once again 10 inches. I measured the fabric for the scarf, 10 inches. In order to put the hanger on, what I did was I took that twine, I fed one side of that twine through the bead. So I had the bead on the twine in the middle. Both of those ends of the twine went through the smaller wood round. And then one piece of twine went through the larger wood round. I brought both pieces up, tied it in a knot, and glued it down. So now we have the ornament hanger attaching all of my wood pieces. So putting the snowman face together, I used a paint marker, did 2 dots for the mouth and a squiggly line between the 2 dots for the eyes, and then a small paintbrush to actually paint that nose on. It was actually very simple. I used my scissors to just cut some fringe into the bottom piece of that scarf. Here you can actually see how I laced the twine through the bead to create the hanger on the snowman. Tying around the piece of fabric and getting it nice and tight, gluing it at where the holes were open on the bead, making sure that scarf is covering those holes on the bead, which makes it a lot more, not being able to see those holes in the bead just makes me happy. So I glued down the scarf and trimmed off any of the extra fringe. So I really wanted to put a hat on it, and I'm like, I don't know. It's, snowman hat. Everybody has a hat. It could be a little, people call them toboggans. That was a sled out west in Oregon. I just decided I was going to make some little earmuffs. So I took some 18 gauge copper, antique copper wire, and I think it was like 3 inches. I wrapped it around my little Cricut tool, 2 around one way, 2 around the other, and then bent it just to go into the little holes on that bead. I'm going to take this piece of table scatter from the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to cut the smallest one in half. Those are going to be my muffs for the ears. Right on that little hole where the wire's poked into, there goes the little muff on that side, and then a little glue on the other side, and there goes my other ear muff. And I think that is simply adorable. I love the way that turned out. Every snowman needs some sort of buttons down the front or coal. I used some little beads that I had in my stash, and I'm using some Fabri-Tac glue here, putting a little bit on the end of this little craft pick and just laying that bead right down in that Fabri-Tac glue. Now this doesn't take a whole long time to grab, but it does take a little bit, so I put enough on there where it's going to hold the bead in place until the Fabri-Tac dries. And you can see the ones above it. I think they turned out super cute. Now, there are so many different things that people have put on their melting snowmans. I'm having a meltdown, or you're worth melting for. I thought about, that, what is it, Valley Girl, the old Valley Girl movie. Does that tell you how old I am? I loved that when I was a teenager. But I'll stop the world and melt with you. So all I did was take some 3-inch pieces of cotton fabric I had here, and I just wrote on there with one of my markers, "I'll melt for you." And that turned out really cute. My husband, I sent him the picture of it, and of course he came back with, "I'll stop the world and melt with you." So, we're right on the same pages there. I just went ahead and took some vintage photo, Distressed Oxide by Tim Holtz, and I just went around the edges there because, of course, they're outside in the melting snow. It's not going to be pristine clean. So I went ahead and got that ready and made sure you can actually read what it was saying. That sometimes is the hard thing for me. And then I'm just going to glue it right on down there and kind of give it a little wave like it's actually been sitting there in the snow. So when adding the banners across these, I went ahead and used hot glue. I wanted it to have a more instant grab. Of course, hot glue isn't instant, but it does start to solidify right away as it cools. So I went ahead and used the hot glue. I tagged down a little bit there and was able to position the first part of my banner. And then as I kind of crinkled it up, I would add another little dot of hot glue, press it on in there, making sure I have that wave of the banner that I'm looking for. And it just worked out better than trying to use the Fabri-Tac and holding it down each time. Now, I'm definitely an advocate of using what you have when you have it. We have a big willow tree in our backyard, and what perfect little arms for my melting snowmen. So I debated whether to use hot glue or Fabri-Tac on these, and I went with hot glue. Since these are going to stay in my stash, if they fall off, I can always replace them and go ahead and replace them using a stronger glue. But since they're going to be mine, I went ahead and just used the hot glue for now. I just hot glued one down and then put some hot glue across the top of the second and down on the snowman. Laid that on there, and that hot glue grabbed a hold right away. Look at that texture on these guys. Oh my goodness. I think they turned out adorable. The sticks are just laying there. The buttons are just laying there. I just think they turned out super cute. Let me know if you give this one a try. Well, let's get on to our Mod Podge. Now, these are images that I have gotten off of Etsy. I've had them for some time, and I was trying to figure out which images I wanted to put on my Mod Podge ornaments. When these came around, I thought, oh, this is it. These have got to be the ones I use. So I went ahead and printed them out. Now that I printed them on regular copy paper, you can print them on tissue paper, you can print them on rice paper, you can print them on fabric. I went ahead and just used the copy paper, and I should have done it on either my tissue or my rice, but copy paper did just fine. So I wanted the edges of this to look like they'd been a little burnt out, like they'd been around for a while. These old photos have been through the mill. So I went ahead and I used my scissors and I roughed up the edges so that they would have a little bit of tearing on there. I came back in with my vintage photo, went around the edges of that to kind of give the fading effect on into the paper. The second color I went ahead and used on those is black soot. And of course, that's going to get you that little bit of the fiery burn on the edge. So I do have a Tim Holtz distresser. I don't know where it is right now. I'm still unpacking my craft room. So I just wanted to get this done. So I used my scissors. Once again, the vintage photo around there. And then I'm going to come back in with the black soot on the outside of that. And that gives us such a distinct coloring. So let's get our wood rounds ready to Mod Podge, decoupage, whatever you want to call it. So I'm using Mod Podge. I keep mine in a canning jar right next to me. They're original jars. Since I buy it in the big jugs, the lids tend to glue shut on me and I just can't open them anymore. So I went ahead and put it in a big canning jar. I want to make sure there is enough Mod Podge on here because these are raw wood rounds. And so that's going to really absorb that Mod Podge. So once I get that on there, they need to dry, and I put them up above as I started creating the bows that I wanted to go on top of these ornaments. So I picked out some different laces out of my bag o' laces. This is the different ribbons and laces that I have. I just pulled out some colors that actually go right along with those papers that I printed out. So the creams and the chocolates and the sepia, just those colors that are going to make this all look pretty cohesive. So I did pull in a beautiful gold one. There it is. And think that one is just going to give us a little bit more balance so that we're not all just so monochromatic. And I really like the way it turned out. So all of these different pieces of ribbon and twine and eyelash trim, I think that they all have those tones in there that are great for what we're doing. So I found some feathers in my stash. I don't remember when I bought them, but they were actually in a large gallon Ziploc bag, so they are still clean and crisp. And I went ahead and used those on there because in the pictures, the little girls have angel wings. And I thought, oh, let's just run with this. So I went ahead and I took a piece of twine and laid it down and then started putting my ribbons down across the top of that. Once I did that, I went ahead and just tied it around the back, added some hot glue, and then went ahead and just wrapped it around a few times and tied the tip off. I have a rusty bell here, and I just took another piece of twine and I am just looping that around the bell, and I'm going to just tie a little bow on that. And I think, okay, I did not tie a little bow on that. I just trimmed off those edges. But I think that those little bows turned out perfect. And you'll see here in a minute how they just all went together very well. So here are my images and my dried wood rounds. And I am going to show you how easy these are to attach. Oh my goodness. I've been watching people use this iron method, and I've only used it a few times now. But this has been the most easy Mod Podging I have ever done. Making sure that Mod Podge was on my wood round and a nice thick layer, and it was dry. Now I can just lay my images over the top of that, and I use some parchment paper down, and then I used my little iron over that parchment paper, and it just attached to that wood round just beautifully. So now I'm going to come right back in with my ink that I used around the edges of my papers. So I'm starting with that, oh my goodness, vintage photo. This is Tim Holtz Distressed Oxide Vintage Photo. I'm going to go ahead and start with that all the way around because that's what I started on the paper with. And then I'm going to come in with our black soot. Now the black soot is going to help highlight between that paper and then our wood round. So our paper, I wanted to look like it had a little crispy burned edge, and this does the trick. When you rough it up with your scissors or your distress tool, and then you can come back in with those colors, it just really works out very nice. As for Mod Podge or decoupage, this is my favorite way to do it now. It's just been wonderful. So now we're going to go ahead and stick our messy bows on these. And I just added a good dollop of hot glue, and that's going to sit right on top of my ornament there. Now my only concern with this is we do have the bark, and if that bark comes loose, that ornament is going to come and be separated from the bow, and that means it's separated from our hanger. So you'll see how we fix this later. So once again, a very good dollop of hot glue there. I want to make sure we've got enough on there that it's going to attach well with that twine and those feathers and the wood round that has enough texture where it's going to grab on there very well. And that's how I did these. If I would have drilled holes in them, it would have been much easier just to lace that twine through there. But honestly, I was being lazy, and I didn't want to go and get my drill bits from downstairs and bring them on up. So I just went the lazy way here. And so I took some of these short, fat clothespins, and I used a combination of hot glue and Fabri-Tac. Now the hot glue is going to grab that immediately, and it is going to start to solidify and cool down rather quickly, while my Fabri-Tac takes a little bit longer to actually cure. So I went ahead and put those on there, and I I laid it across not only the back of the ornament, but right on up into my bow area. So it should be right on there with the twine, the ornament holder, and the bow, and the back of that ornament itself. And hopefully you can either clip these on your tree branch now, or you can hang them up. Look at how adorable those turned out. I'm still debating on whether or not these are my favorite. They're my husband's favorite. They're my sister-in-law's favorite. But look at how just stinking cute they turned out. Oh my goodness, talk about adding a little Victorian charm to your Christmas. Here we go. So our angels were definitely a little Victorian. And here we're going to do a little bit of vintage lace to create sort of like a Victorian tree, I guess. I mean, I love farmhouse, but I also love Victorian. They're just so beautiful. But I'm not into the big gaudy stuff. I like the homemade, let's use our leftovers, let's get this out. And that's what they did. They grabbed what they had leftovers, and it could have been from their daughter's dresses. It could be pictures. I mean, that's what they used, is things around their home to decorate and celebrate that previous year or the years before. So here you see a lot of those same laces that I used in our angels. I just had it out still, and I just went for it, and I'm like, I'm going to go ahead and make this lace tree. It was a little painful to try to get everything held down with that Fabri-Tac glue on some of the laces that were flat, because I wanted it to have a little ruffled up look. Trees aren't flat. They have texture and dimension. So that's what I wanted to do here. So each little layer of the lace is going to be just glued in a little shorter. It's not going to go all the way out to the end of our wood round. And you can see as I start going right along here, my little strips of glue keep getting smaller and smaller. And here's another one that's kind of flat. Now, another way you can do it where you're not just grabbing it with your fingers trying to ruffle it up is take some thread or some embroidery floss, and you can just weave it on through your lace and then pull it and create a ruffle and then lay it down. I just wanted to be lazy, I guess. Again, here we go. I wanted to get these things done and just try to do it the best of my ability with what I had on hand in my immediate vicinity. Now, this is the only color that I kind of went off with, and it's kind of a burgundy purple. I know that sounds a little weird, but it's really not a purple and it's really not a burgundy. So I guess like a dusty something. So once I got that last bit of lace on there, I went ahead and trimmed up the sides of that and then kind of worked with it to see just where it needed to sit to actually have the angles of a tree made out of that lace. So this little lace that I'm actually going to put on here next, I have had for years and years. Okay, I think I had it from before my first child. And today's actually her birthday and she's 36. So that tells you how long I've been holding on to this. So I thought it would make a great background to actually put the buttons on the top of my tree. And it does. I was a little sad covering up the pretty rose on there, but I can't keep saving and hoarding things. So I just went ahead and put that down. I cut out my twine once again, using that hot glue to create the the sharper end so that it can go right on through my button and not have any issues. So I'm going to thread one side through one hole and then the other one through the other hole. And then I'm going to just go ahead and give it a tie at the end to create my hanger. Now, of course, I'm going to add a little hot glue in there, and that's going to help those pieces of twine hold together as our ornament hangs on our tree. So now on the back of this button, I'm going to go ahead and add some Fabri-Tac on one side and then hot glue on the other. So I've got the Fabri-Tac on the bottom of the button, hot glue on the top of that rose ribbon, and then I'm going to lay it right on top there so that the hot glue will grab and the Fabri-Tac will do that permanent hold on there. So once again, I'm going to use that hot glue and twist it around, thread it through your button, and then you're going to go ahead and create the end of your hanger on your ornament, adding some hot glue to the end of that little knot. I'm going to add some Fabri-Tac to the bottom of my button, and then I'm going to add some hot glue to the top of that rose piece of ribbon, and then I'm going to lay that right on top so that the Fabri-Tac will hold at the bottom, hot glue will hold at the top, and it will be all nice and strong. There's my last one, and then we can take a peek at this and see if there's anything else we want to do. Since most of my stuff is distressed and farmhouse, I did come back in with my distressed oxide vintage photo, and I added some on to the edges of my lace and onto the background of my wood round that you can actually see. This actually gives it a little bit more of a distressed, been around the block a few times look. Now, you don't want to call this a Victorian or vintage or however you want to go there, because you have twine on there and you have it on a wood round. That's not something that usually goes together with your Victorian, but it definitely goes with farmhouse. So what do you think about these? These were fun to make, and I just used bits and bobs of ribbon. I did cut some of that table scatter in half and glued it on top of my buttons, and that's where I came up with these beautiful lace tree ornaments. Now here we go with our clay ornaments. So I have our last 4 wood rounds here, and I'm going to give them a coat of the crimson red. Now I actually do 2 coats on here. It doesn't take much. We all know how to paint. So I did take some of this air dry clay. Now I got this at, I think it was 5 Below. So I got this there, and I thought I would give it a shot. And it reminds me of terracotta. Now I've not used air dry clay before. I have used the polymer clay where I baked it. I did use some of that magic mold when making stuff with my grandson, but that's a lot different than what this is. So I powdered my molds with some cornstarch and then loaded them in and tried to get off any excess across the top. You can see my camera moving again, and I'm so sorry. I get that in there, and then I just flip it over and let gravity help pull it out. Now these are no special molds. I've gotten them off of Amazon, different places where they're just inexpensive. And so I have to go in and actually clean them up. Once I got them cleaned up, what I did is I went in with my Fabri-Tac and I loaded it on the back of there, but I spread it around with my fingers, knowing that we had a good even coat. Now this clay is still wet, so it's not dry. I mean, it started getting dry because it doesn't take long, I guess. But I went ahead and I wanted to get it down so there wouldn't be any cracking on it and it would fit nicely on my ornaments. So this was pretty simple here, and it's a very messy job. You can use a brush if you want to, foam dabber, but it seemed to be easier with my fingers. So the next morning, this was dry, the glue was dry, the clay was dry, and I just came in with some sandpaper to kind of clean up that clay that was just on those ornaments from just sitting on there when I was trying to find where I wanted placement. Because the clay was wet, it did leave some residue, so it's just easy for me to come in with some low grit, high grit sandpaper and clean it up a little bit. This did not mean that I had to come in and actually touch up some more with my red paint. And then I got red paint on the side of course, the clay ornaments, but you're going to paint those anyway. So I didn't care too much about that. It was just about going in and making sure that that terracotta color wasn't going to pop up on that red wood round so easy. I wanted to make sure that it had a nice good coat all the way around and you couldn't necessarily see the terracotta clay in there. Once that red was painted, I came in and measured the end of one of the jumbo craft sticks down and just how far it needed to be for me to put a little door on there. Well, I don't have the same grip I used to, and so it took me a little longer to actually cut through this craft stick. When I measured it down, I was able to go down and put some pressure on one side, flip it over, put pressure on the other. Once I got that all done, I could just sand the end of it, make it nice and smooth, and then use that as a template to cut out the other four pieces, well, the other three pieces, to give me 4 doors. Once those are done, I'm going to go ahead and start painting them white. Those are pretty simple to paint. I'm only doing one side, so I don't need to have it painted on both sides. It's going to be glued down. So once those are done, I'm going to go ahead and start in on painting my clay. Okay, let's start painting our little dried clay pieces now. I went ahead and got a smaller detailed brush, and I'm using just a little at a time because I don't want to make a mess all over that already painted red. So when I do this, I'm making sure I have enough paint on the end of my brush to get in the details of that mold that I used. There's a lot of texture on these molds and a lot of detailing in there, and it took a little bit of time and patience to just get in there and go all the way around. I tried my best not to get any white on the red, but that just wasn't going to help. That just wasn't going to happen. You know, I had chocolate in my peanut butter all day that day, but it's still easy to clean up after I was done. This process took a little longer than I anticipated, but it was definitely worth it in the end. I needed to remember that this clay was very dry, so it did take a lot of that paint to actually go on there because it kept absorbing that paint right on in. So I needed to get these doors on there, and I thought I would go ahead and just use some hot glue with some Fabri-Tac. I needed to find the right combination to get that on there. So the first door, kind of a little backwards, but what I ended up doing is putting some Fabri-Tac around the outside edge of those doors and hot glue right down the center, and that actually made a really good seal for these doors. Now, the last door I did was actually a little long for my wood. And so all I did was take some of my scissors, trim it off around those corners right there to make it a little bit of a curvature, and sand it on down. No big deal. Now I just came in with some matte Mod Podge and went over this. I wanted to use the matte because I didn't want to add a bunch of gloss to this chalk paint, because chalk paint has a pretty flat base and I really like the look of that. The Mod Podge over this is going to help just seal in those colors on my ornament. So just an easy coat of Mod Podge around all my ornaments. Okay, let's get some doorknobs on here. I have some flat back half pearls on here that have the adhesive on the back. They're used in scrapbooking a lot, so you can get them at Dollar Tree, Walmart, Michael's, Hobby Lobby, probably Joann's as well. And I put them down on my doors while the Mod Podge was still wet, so that adhesive on the back of them and the Mod Podge would hold on there nicely. So I went through some of my greenery that I've had cut and leftovers from other pieces, and I just brought some out and some twine here. This is actually white with gold laced in between it, and I'm going to lay these on down there and create a swag for the front of our doors. The greenery that I have is actually too big to make a wreath to go on these doors. So I decided that a little swag would be the perfect little touch. So I'm just adding some glue to the back and then bringing it around the front and tying a little bow. And then I'm going to just add a little color to that. Once I get this little bow tied down there nice and get it all the right shape, that's what's so nice about these. I have some table scatter or some filler, vase filler, and they're styrofoam balls and they're glitter red. And so I just cut one in half, dabbed some glue at the top of that little swag, and hot glued that down there. Now I can get those little ends trimmed up and make it just the right size, and it'll sit on the front of one of our doors. Now I have 3 more to do. So that's all I did. Laid out my little piece of twine, layered on my greenery, my white pieces, tied it in the front, flipped it around to the back, tied it with some hot glue, and then brought it back around the front and tied a bow. That gives us some nice security on that swag, so it should not fall apart on us. That hot glue is going to hold in that little bit of twine there. We're going to measure out the length of our little tails of our bow, put that other half of our vase filler on there and pop it on up. Now I'm going to come in with a little touch of some metallic gold here, and I'm just going to add a little bit of sparkle to these. I wanted these to kind of look like little fairy doors out in the forest. I mean, they are on a wood round. Could be like the knot of a tree. That would be super cool little idea. So I just came in, and on those little pieces that those mold pieces that I did out of the air dry clay, I'm just brushing across the top of those so that the detailing will be highlighted with that metallic gold. Then I came back in and I just brushed across the front of the doors with it just a tad. So I've got this little swags that I created, and now I'm going to look at the doors and see which one it's going to fit on properly, because they're all a little different. You know, they're not all the same pieces. So I'm just going to add some hot glue, pop it at the top of that door, and just give it a little push and let that hot glue grab and let that swag just sit there. Now let's work on the hanger. I have some of my little wooden beads here, and I didn't want to go the natural in them. I'm going to go ahead and use that gold. I have a barbecue skewer that I have packed from Dollar Tree, and I'm just going to use this skewer to hold my beads on there while I give a nice coat of this metallic gold. I didn't want the texture like I did on the snowman, so this is why I'm actually putting them on the barbecue skewer and getting them painted on there. Now these don't take very long to dry at all, so let's move on. Hitting them with my heat gun, rolling them around, and they are ready to go. Just that simple. So getting the top hangers ready to go, just like the other ornaments, 10 inches long. Go ahead and give them a cut. We're going to use that hot glue again, and we're going to put some hot glue on the tip of these so that we can get them threaded through those beads easily. And I want hot glue on the end, on both ends of each of those strands, because we're going to need to thread both ends through the beads. So I'm taking 2 beads off, and I'm going to go ahead and thread one end through, and then I'm going to take the other end and thread it through, and then do the same for the next bead. So if you pull, you're going to have the beads come totally off because there's no knot. So I'm putting a knot in the top, and then I'm going to take some hot glue and put it at the bottom. Now I realize that I need a spot to actually glue it on the ornament. So I had to pull it up real quick and measure it, and then add some hot glue to the back of that ornament, and then put that twine right on down there. Hot glue it and give it a good press, and know that it's on there very well. I wanted to add a little bit of hot glue between the beads so that they are down and they're not going to ride up. Okay, now I left this one in for you because I wanted you to see what happens when you struggle. Now, this one did not want to lace through both sides. Both ends of the twine didn't want to lace through the beads. So I added some more hot glue to it to make sure it was firm enough to poke through there like a needle, and it still wasn't doing well. So I actually moved the bead down the twine to another location. Some twine, when you look at it, has thicker areas than others or has more fraying than others, and you might need to look and have a different area of your twine to use your bead on to actually thread it through. So I wanted to show you that because we all struggle with it. So this is the way I went ahead and did the same thing and glued it right on down to that back, just like we did the first one. Now, I'm a person that likes a little more, and I was looking at these. I had them done like this, and I was like, they just need something else. So I went ahead and I added some little tiny Christmas lights, and you can see it there on the top, right there, the little tiny Christmas lights, and I still wasn't happy with it. So I took some fairy lights and I glued it all the way around the wood round, and I glued the piece, the battery pack to the back. And I love how these turned out. I just wasn't happy with the final project. There you go. So I added that, glued it on the back, and it turned out great. Guys, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to spend with me. I enjoyed making these so much. If you enjoyed it, please give me a thumbs up. If you've not subscribed, I hope you will consider doing so now by hitting that subscribe button. If you want to know when I'm uploading a new video, hit that bell notification. YouTube should notify you when I've uploaded my next video. And as always, stay safe, God bless, and bye for now.